Hi guys, we are going to be starting the American Civil War today, and I wanted to have the opportunity to actually explain the notes to you rather than having you just read them. So you get to listen to my pretty voice for the next 10 or 15 minutes. So here we go. America before the Civil War. If you follow down through the notes, you will see these are the reasons why the North and the South are divided and why eventually the Civil War starts. So looking back at history and discussions that we've had before, most people are under the impression that the Civil War was fought over slavery. Now, while slavery played an important role in the Civil War and caused some of the tension both socially and economically between the North and the South, it is not the cause of the war. Wow, mind blown. Okay, so we're going to look at the actual causes why the North and the South start fighting. So the very first thing that the North and the South are upset about that causes a divide between the two groups is the Missouri Compromise. Missouri Compromise happens in 1820, and it was a big controversy. It was over slavery, but more so it was over states' rights. Whether states had the right to choose to be a free state or a slave state. And this becomes super important because it also involved Congress and giving either the North or the South more congressional power in the form of senators and representatives who then could vote for new legislation. So both sides were worried that the other side would get too much power depending on the new states that were created. So before 1820, in the South where there was slavery, 5 slaves were necessary per square acre of land for agricultural purposes. So if you had cotton, if you were growing tobacco, if you were growing other high yield crops, you needed 5 slaves per acre to be able to work a plantation. Okay? After 1820, we have Eli Whitney, who develops the cotton gin. And the cotton gin made it more efficient to have agricultural crops like cotton. Cotton, super intense, requires you to pull all the pieces apart, to take out the center that's full of seeds, and before people had to do that by hand. Now with the cotton gin, you can run it through a machine, it mills it up, and it pulls those seeds out for you. So because of that, now you can have 5 slaves working 10 acres of crop. So much larger amounts of space that are able to be agriculturally used, makes a lot more money for the South. So because of this, the South needs more land. They start expanding further west and growing the plant. Okay, so Missouri wants to become a state, and they go to Congress and argue why they should become a state, that they have enough people, that they have the land, and there was a process to become a state. So Missouri goes through that process, and in Congress, it's a huge debate. Okay, they are worried. Adjust the camera there for a second. They are worried that if Missouri becomes a state, that it will be admitted as a slave state, and that will give the South more power congressionally than the North. So they come up with a compromise. The Missouri Compromise does 3 main things. Number 1, it allows Missouri to become a state. Okay, they get their statehood. Yay. Number 2, it says that slavery is not going to be allowed in any new territories outside of the Louisiana Territory. So Louisiana Territory gets added to the west of the Mississippi River, and that land is not going to have slavery. Third, Maine gets added as a free state. Maine didn't have enough people to become a state on its own. It hadn't gone through the process, but the North and the South decided that if Missouri was going to become a slave state, then Maine would become a free state, and that would keep everything even. Okay? So they created this crazy little map that you can see in the notes, and they had the 3630 parallel. So that is the southern border of Missouri, and that was their border of where slavery was no longer going to be allowed. So north of the 3630, no slavery allowed up here. south of the 3630, slavery is still okay. So if they continue that line further west, that's what they're going to go with at this point based on this particular law. Now this lasts for a little while, makes everybody happy. Things continue to go pretty peacefully from here for at least a little while. Then we have the Industrial Revolution. So like we talked about in class, the Industrial Revolution is this huge influx of industry, of factories, of new inventions. You guys researched a whole ton of different inventions in class. And so we're going to look at 4 specific industries that really boomed and increased transportation and made a lot of money for the United States at this time. So the first one is the road and turnpike system. So this is the U.S. interstate system. Okay, now today we have roads that go from one state to another. You can drive all the way from New York City to California without stopping on the interstate. And that starts in 1795. So they build the very first turnpike, which is called the Lancaster Turnpike. It's 62 miles by 1807, and it goes from Lancaster, Maryland to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So this big new road gets built. In 1818, they have another road program called the National Road. It's called the Cumberland Road in modern day, and it goes from Cumberland, Maryland to Wheeling, West Virginia. It's 650 to 700 miles approximately, and it eventually connects to Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, and Indianapolis, Indiana. So this road stretches and allows for transportation. This allows trucks to carry heavier supplies and materials. It allows people to get their crops from their agricultural plantations to the factories much more quickly and more cheaply. So big project that the United States government funds. Next is the canal system. So a canal, like my little drawing here, is a man-made ditch. Okay? The difference between a canal and a man-made stream or a river is the shape and the lock system. So this is the shape of a canal. The canal is narrower at the base and wider at the top, and that's so that it requires less water to actually navigate. It's only 4 feet deep, but with the 40-foot across at the top, it still allows large ships or barges that are carrying materials to float up these man-made canals. Now the other interesting thing about a canal is that it has a series of locks. And locks are these doors that open and close to allow the water up the river or down the river. And by doing so, they can raise a boat from a ocean level to a lake level as it goes along by filling up that lock system. And so I'm going to show you guys a quick little video of how those locks work. Okay, so these guys do a much better job of explaining the canal system than I do. So here we go.
A canal connects 2 bodies of water that may have different water levels. Ships traveling through the canal move from one water level to another through a lock, a rectangular chamber with watertight gates at each end. In the lock, the level of water can be raised and lowered by a system of valves and water passages. Suppose a ship is traveling from the higher water level to the lower. First, an operator at a nearby station opens the lock gates at the high end. The ship enters the lock, and the lock gates are closed. Next, the lock operator opens one or more valves so that water from the lock slowly drains into the lower section of the canal. When the water in the lock is level with the lower water, the operator opens the gate and the ship sails through. To move a ship upstream, the procedure is reversed.
Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So it's just a system of doors that allow water to travel in and raise up or lower down a boat. Okay, now this is super important because this canal system allows people to travel from the ocean into the Great Lakes and into the interior of the United States on the same ship. It used to be that your ship loaded at the dock, your materials were taken off the ship and had to be put onto either a smaller vessel or onto a train or a car or another transportation method. Now we can make our own canals and the boats can just travel through to where they need to. So in 1817 to 1825, they built the Clinton Ditch, which was a 363-mile long lock system. Okay, this connected the Atlantic Ocean all the way through to the Great Lakes. In 1827, they started building an extensive railroad system. In 1827, they went from Baltimore to Ohio. 1830, there was 2 railroads. The Pennsylvania Railroad is probably the most well-known, and they had a whole lot of problems. Okay, they build this railroad, and it's super unsafe, largely because there's only one track, and when a train is traveling on that one track, there's nowhere for another train to pull off. They didn't necessarily have like the side system like we do today, where you can have 2 trains passing each other. So they would have these collisions of trains traveling in opposite directions. Not good. In 1844, Samuel Morse invented the telegraph. This is huge for the railroad. It allowed traveling trains. There's my alliteration for the notes today. Timmy, hopefully you enjoy that. The traveling trains talked using the telegraph. Okay, so in 1851, this helped the railroad to avoid large collisions by giving trains the opportunity to pull over and wait for another passing train to go. And it modernizes the railroad and makes it more useful in traveling and carrying large loads. So people start using the railroad instead of using trucks to get their supplies from one place to another. The last invention is the factory system, and again, this is one that we've already talked about. You had Samuel Slater, who was an English factory worker who smuggled the plans back to the United States for the factory system, and the idea that you could have people who were unskilled building different parts or pieces of equipment or parts and pieces of a product like a shoe in a factory. So the domestic system, which is the system of individual people in their houses making products, gets replaced with this factory system where you have unskilled workers working in a factory rather than in their own homes. So Francis Cabot Lowell, we talked about him with the Lowell factories and the girls that worked for him. So he hired young unmarried women to work in his factories. And then again, Eli Whitney, this guy comes up multiple times. He invents another product. So he was the guy, remember, just a few minutes ago, we talked about the cotton gin. So now Eli Whitney comes back and he says, I have another great idea, interchangeable parts. We think about interchangeable parts on a daily basis. You change your light bulb. You don't throw out the lamp and buy a new one. You replace a tire on the car. You don't buy a whole new car when your tire goes flat. That's all from Eli Whitney. So Eli Whitney said if you can change out the parts and every part is the same size, then you can create these products more quickly and efficiently, and you can save the parts and the pieces that are being broken. So he started this with using rifles. Okay, he starts building his own militia, his own military. In 1812, he starts a factory that builds 15,000 rifles. And the thing that's interchangeable in a rifle is the bullets. Okay, before 1812, when you bought a gun, you had to have the little clamp and be able to make the bullets that fit into your specific gun. Now, if bullets are all standardized and the same size, you can make all the bullets and they can go in all the guns much more quickly. So we can thank Eli Whitney for the NRA. Immigration. Okay, so all of these things, why do they lead to the Civil War? Why would a factory system, why would the railroad, why would canals cause the Civil War? So where are all of these things being built? Okay, railroads, canals, roads, and factories are all being constructed in the north in a significantly larger extent than what was happening in the south. So you have this huge infrastructure, you have all of these new factories, all of these modes of transportation that the North is taking advantage of and therefore able to make more money. And the South is stuck in their agricultural society. They can't even build a factory to use their own cotton. They have to sell their cotton to the North, who then turns it into products that they sell back to those southern states. So in this whole process, the North had significantly larger amounts of money and significantly more infrastructure than the South did. Add to that immigration. So in the early 1800s, we start seeing a massive influx of new immigrant groups to the United States. And this is because of something called the push-pull factor, or the push-pull theory. And it's the idea that everyone moves from one place to another for a reason. You don't just wake up one morning and say, hey, I think I'm going to move to Connecticut. There's a reason for it. And at this time, with immigrant groups, they were either being pushed out of somewhere, they had to leave for a specific reason, or they were being pulled in or lured in by the idea that life was so much better and there were so many more opportunities in the United States than wherever they were coming from. So the two main immigrant groups that move in the early 1800s are the Irish and the Germans. The Irish, there were more than 2 million Irish immigrants by 1860. These groups are Irish Catholics, and they are moving because Ireland had the potato blight, or the potato famine. Huge amounts of potato crops were wiped out due to this infection in the potatoes, and it caused massive starvation. People are starving. In Ireland today, it is still referred to as the Great Hunger. Okay, so people come here for better opportunities so that they can feed their families. And when they move to the United States, they specifically move to the East Coast large cities. So New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, they want to live in the big cities that are representative or similar to the cities that they were leaving in Ireland, so places like Dublin. And that means that they stay in the northern hemisphere. They're staying in the northern states. The Germans come in 1848, and after that, after they have a revolution, they try and get rid of their king in Germany. It doesn't work, and so there's this large group in Germany that are forced into exile. And so they come to the United States as well, and they settle in the Midwest region, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana. Again, also northern states, but more interior. They're not staying on the coast like the Irish did. The effects of this are that these groups of people come with skills. Okay, they are skilled businessmen. They are doctors, lawyers, carpenters. They understand business, and so they open shops. They open bakeries and restaurants and their own mills and different things. And they are super prosperous. So it brings a lot more money, again, to the northern economy. It also increases the belief in strong work ethic and the idea that every citizen is important or has value, which is something that's a difference between the northern and the southern philosophy in society. They also believe in a strong educational system. The Irish, being Irish Catholics, start these Catholic schools, parochial schools, and have their students or their children going to school. So they're paying for that. The Germans come in and they want their students to go to school. And so they start public schools and really press their children to attend school. And so in the North, there's this big shift that people should be well educated, that people should be employed, and that they should be making good money for the jobs that they're doing, which in the South is not the case. In the South, you had to be rich, you had to be white, and you had to be male to be able to go to school. So in the South, education was not valued the same way that it was in the North at this time because of the immigrant population. So again, another split between the North and the South. Now you have a new group of people, new ideals, new way of life, different ethnicities. All of this continues to separate the North and the South further. And then let's throw a war in there. War with Mexico. We've all heard about the fight with Texas and the Alamo. That's this war. Okay, so Texas is part of Mexico. Okay, they are owned by Mexico. Mexican people live there. In 1838, a whole bunch of Americans move into Texas, start farms in Texas, start cattle ranches in Texas, and eventually they decide they don't want to be part of Mexico anymore. So in 1838, they have a war. The U.S. assists in this war. We're not going to jump in entirely, but we're going to provide materials and we're going to apply some ammunition, some supplies. We're going to send some people to help. And Texas becomes independent from Mexico. They separate and they are their own country. Okay? They are the only state in the United States that has actually been its own country, and written into their constitution, they could separate from the United States and become their own country again if they voted and chose to do so. Now, because Texas becomes a republic, they start dealing with the United States. The United States doesn't want to go to war with Mexico. We've already done that. We've already been there. So we leave Texas as the Texas Republic for a number of years. Okay? We're not going to grab it right away. But eventually, there are enough people in Texas who are U.S. citizens or want to be U.S. citizens that the United States decides to annex Texas. So we're going to take Texas and make it a state, right? So this doesn't cause a huge stir. Mexico knew it was going to happen. The problem becomes, where is the border? Where do we separate the United States from Mexico? And both sides had a different view. So I have this little map drawn up here that's a little bit difficult to understand. So I want to explain this. So this is the Gulf of Mexico. And coming from the Gulf of Mexico, you have two major rivers, the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. And the land between those two rivers is the area that we're fighting about. Okay? So the United States believed that the Rio Grande was the border. Mexico believes that the Nueces River is the border. Both sides are fighting over the land in the middle. Okay? So, what do we do about it? The U.S. is super smart. Let's start a war, right? So, President James K. Polk sends Zachary Taylor and 2,000 men to the Rio Grande River. He says, we need to defend our territory. So he sends them to this little border. Now, remember, where does Mexico think the border is? They think it's up here. So the U.S. has just invaded Mexico. Okay? So it's our fault, right? Now, Mexico believes that this is an invasion, so they send their troops to their border, the Nueces River, to defend their border. But wait, there's U.S. troops already here at the Rio Grande. Those two troops are going to come into conflict. Okay, so in May, the Mexican army comes north. They kill 16 Americans. And in May 1846, the United States officially declares war on Mexico. Okay, this is where the Battle of the Alamo happens. Okay, it's right in this area. So the Battle of the Alamo, they go to the Alamo. It's supposed to be this Federal Reserve armory where they can get more supplies, get more weapons. Not very easy to defend because you basically get stuck inside and you can't get out. So they sit there and they wait. And the reason that they were there was to slow down the Mexican army. Because if they hadn't sat there, the Mexican army would have gone to the Nueces River and would have set up camp there and been able to defend, and we'd be fighting over a different border. But we wanted to fight over the Rio Grande. So by setting up at the Alamo, we basically sacrificed those guys. They were able to sit there and slow down the Mexican army until the United States Army got mobilized and was able to get there to defend what we thought we owned. So we sign a treaty eventually. The United States wins this war. The United States says, this is the border. We're going to be right here at the Rio Grande River. They also take New Mexico and California from Mexico. So we gain a whole bunch of new territory in the west. The Rio Grande is the official river. And then we feel bad about it. Oh, maybe that wasn't so nice of us. So the United States, in reparations, pays $15 million to Mexico to buy the land. Okay? So that's the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Now, here's the interesting thing. Why does this play a factor in the Civil War? Is Texas a northern state or a southern state? What do you think? It's in the South. Is it part of the Louisiana Purchase? No. So it doesn't fall under the Missouri Compromise. So what do we do with Texas? Does Texas get to be a slave state? Does Texas get to be a free state? Does Texas get to decide? Who knows? So it causes a huge controversy again in Congress about states' rights and who is going to top the balance. Is the North going to have more power? Is the South going to have more power? So, at the same time, we've taken California. We've taken New Mexico. We have all of this new territory. And so they create another compromise. The Compromise of 1850 does the same thing that the original compromise does. It tries to keep that balance even. So California, the 1849ers is a huge rush to California for gold. 80,000 new people moved to California, and they're talking about statehood. So the compromise says that California gets to be a free state. Now remember, California goes north all the way to south for the United States. So they're going to be free. New Mexico and Utah, we haven't talked about Utah yet, but we're going to make this a new territory, and they're going to get to organize without any restrictions. So they get to decide, do they want to be a slave state? Do they want to be a free state? Who knows? It depends on who eventually decides to move to those territories. It's the idea, it's called popular sovereignty. Congress then, to keep the South happy, enacts a Fugitive Slave Act. Now this act says that if any slaves run away, that the owner has the right to chase them down and go and get them and bring them back. This means if they go into a northern state, they can be brought back to the South as a slave. This keeps the South happy for a little while, keeps the North happy for a little while. And then the icing on the cake is the election of 1860. So in 1860, you have 4 major candidates for president. Stephen Douglas is a Northern Democrat. Breckinridge is a Southern Democrat. Abraham Lincoln is the Republican candidate. And a guy named Bowe is a Constitutional Union Party person. So what this means is that those 4 candidates split the vote. Okay? They each get a percentage. Stephen Douglas, the Northern Democrat, got the largest amount of the popular vote. He had northern states that voted for him that were Democratic. Breckinridge gets 18%, Abraham Lincoln gets 19%, and the Constitutional Union Party guy gets 13%. So it's pretty evenly split, except for Stephen Douglas, who gets a huge amount of the popular vote, right? But here's the problem. The Electoral College vote, which decides our president, was split. So Abraham Lincoln, who is the Republican candidate, got 80 Electoral College votes. The whole North voted for Abraham Lincoln. He only got 19% of the popular vote, but he gets 80 Electoral College votes. He gets to become president. Now, my little circle here moved a little bit. If I adjust that to where it's supposed to be circling the numbers between Breckinridge and Douglas. And what you'll see is that if the Democratic Party, Stephen Douglas and Breckinridge, had run together and not split the Democratic vote, they would have had 84 votes and they would have won. But the Democrats were divided between North and South. They couldn't pick one candidate, so those votes got divided, which allowed Abraham Lincoln to win the presidential candidacy. So as a result of this, the Southern states are super upset. None of the South voted for Abraham Lincoln, right? They didn't like his anti-slavery policy or his anti-slavery platform, and they believed that he would affect slavery once he became president. So when he was elected in 1860, the next day, the South secedes. Okay, so the Southern states say, we didn't vote for him, he's not our president, and they create the Confederate States of America, and they nominate Breckinridge as their president. Remember, he's the guy that the Southern Democrats, 18% of the population votes for him. So he gets nominated to become president. So that's the start of the Civil War. The South splits off. The North says, no, you can't. We start with conflict between the two. But the causes, as you can see several times, slavery gets brought up, but it's not the cause of the Civil War. Okay, hopefully you guys understand this. You're going to use this information to do a drawing activity. So you have, open this up, you have 5 different topics, and you're going to draw an illustration for each one of those that explains how it is a cause of the Civil War. So you're going to look at slavery, and why would slavery affect the Civil War? Why would that be a cause? Western expansion, so remember, people moving west, the election of 1860, the differences between the Northern and the Southern economy, and immigration, people moving into the North or into the South from other countries. So you're going to draw a picture for each of those, and then you're going to write a description that includes 3 facts about why each of those things was a factor that led to the Civil War. You can do this as a presentation if you want to. You could do a PowerPoint or a Prezi or a Glogster. You could also just draw these out as pictures on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So whichever way you want to design your project, you have the rest of the day today and tomorrow to draw out these pictures and write out your descriptions for the Civil War. So good luck. Have fun.